Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Brains versus Brawn 2 following week 5, the merge week of the show. And this was a good week, all things considered. I feel like there were some interesting results and some interesting placements here in this ranking, but we'll get to it soon enough. But we have 13 people to talk about, and this wasting more time. Let's get into the video. So starting off at number 13, we have the merge boot of the season, and here we have Jesse. And I wasn't too surprised by this. I felt like Jesse had been set up for a downfall for a little bit now. And considering how his edit has been kind of inconsistent, where he only got more content at the points where people were talking about taking him out, and how he was the embodiment of the Brawn tribe, it just made sense for him to be an early merge boot, and for him to be the merge boot here makes a ton of sense. And he was a pretty consensus target during a lot of the episodes, so not too surprised here. And it is kind of a shame that Jesse ended up this way, as I was somewhat high on him in the preseason, and even during the first week, I felt like he was getting alright content, but then it just kind of went downhill afterwards. So by the end, not too surprised he went out, and obviously he's now out of the game to where he's here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have the next boot on the board, and here we have PD. And again, PD going out in this spot, not too surprising. I felt like he was pretty primed to be an early merge boot. Mind you, it didn't quite happen the way I expected, to where I would have thought that it would be due to his injury, where either he would get medevac due to it getting worse, or him just deciding that he can't deal with the elements anymore and being taken out. And I felt like that would have made a ton of sense here. But instead, he ends up getting taken out in a pretty massive idle play here, and he really gets sniped out here to further weaken the Bronze and to break up him and Kristen. And in a lot of ways, I do feel bad for PD in the sense that he obviously had a lot of stuff happen to him at the very end of his run, between him getting injured and having to wear a sling for the rest of the season, him being taken out one round before the jury after being idled out of the game. And in exchange for all this, he's barely on the show, to where he ends up being one of the most under-edited characters on the season by the end of it, barely getting any confessionals outside of week 1. And while now it makes sense why he got the style of edit, as they didn't want us to feel bad for PD being taken out, as they wanted us to focus more on the spectacle of the actual tribal itself, the fact that he got 0 confessionals in the episode where he got injured really speaks to how much of an afterthought he was on the show. And it really is a shame that he wasn't really on the show more, as he seemed like a fine up person, fine up player, and he seemed to be very well liked. But due to how under-edited he was never really a contender for me, and it didn't shock me that he was eventually taken out around the early merge phase. But obviously he's now out of the game to where he's here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have the final boot from this week, and here we have Laura. And Laura is someone who I did have decently high during a lot of the early season. She was actually my number 1 pick for the first 2 weeks of the season. However, I feel like as the pre-merge went along, she started to show more cracks in her edit. And I feel like by the end, it made sense that she wasn't going to go on to win. I feel like by that point, I was definitely higher on other people. And I feel like with the way things were going, it makes sense that she gets taken out of the spot. As well, there was a lot of attention on the Laura-Logan duo, and while there's a lot of focus on sniping out Logan in particular, I feel like Laura is someone who definitely made plenty of mistakes herself, got plenty of undermining, and it would make sense for her to be taken out as sort of this decoy target to keep Logan in the game for a bit longer. So I'm not too surprised that Laura got taken out in the spot where she was, and I feel like there were definitely some worry signs in her boot episode as well. And if we're talking about Laura more generally, she was someone who I was decently high on in the preseason. I feel like there were definitely some good signs there. And during those first 2 weeks, there were definitely some good things to point out there. Though by the end, I feel like she kind of petered out. And even if she had survived this week, she definitely would have gone down in my power ranking. But obviously, she's now out of the game to where she's here at number 11. And with that, we have 10 people left in the game to talk about. As usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But at number 10, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is Morgan. And what is there to say about Morgan? I feel like with PD out of the game, she is probably the most under-edited person on this season, having one of the lowest confessional counts of the people still in the game, and someone who is barely relevant to what's happening. Where at this point, she has only gotten 1 confessional since episode 4. And considering how prominent she was during their premiere and how much promise there was at the beginning of the season, the fact that Morgan has completely fallen off the face of the earth is really surprising in my view, but has obviously led to her dropping significantly on the power ranking, to where at this point, even Kate is someone that has overshadowed Morgan in the edit. And I feel like the show is just really going out of its way to not show Morgan all that much, which is kind of confusing there. And it's obviously a big reason why I don't think she's winning. when the fact that she's not on the show at all is a major reason why I have her at the very bottom to where she's here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have someone who has also been kind of underedited on the show, even though this person has been more relevant to what's happening in the game. But number 9, we do have Kristen. And Kristen to me feels like a pretty underdeveloped character despite how relevant she seems to be to the actual events of the season, where we see her being pretty focused on during the PD round, where obviously she gets plenty of content there talking about how she was planning to use her idol on PD if she thought that he was in danger, only for Miles to use his knowledge as power to steal her idol. And the fact that she proceeds to get no confessionals in the following episode makes me think that she's just not important to the story, where it feels like she's only getting content because she's relevant to the things that are happening in this particular round. But even then, like, she's still not in a good spot game-wise, where she's still on the bottom. She obviously lost BD there. And even beyond that, she was the decoy target during the latest round. And for Kristen to get no focus during any of this is a pretty bad sign for me, mixing in the fact that I feel pretty confident that Brain's going to win the season. I feel like Kristen's someone who I've been pretty underwhelmed by, despite how relevant she's been to the actual events of this week, which is why she's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we actually have a non-Brawn here, but a Brain. By number 8, we do have Zara. And at this point, I'm pretty convinced Zara's not winning. Mind you, I was already very much in that camp. I felt like Zara was someone who we're not really supposed to be rooting for. And I feel like even this week is more the same, where despite her not getting that much to do on the show, it feels like she's not really being shown in a positive light. Or I feel like the one thing going for her is her connection to Karin due to them being these duo. But even then, you have Karin talking about blindsiding AJ and talking about how doing that would burn Zara. And obviously, while Karin doesn't go through with it, I feel like Zara is not really someone we're supposed to be focusing on. I feel like Karin is clearly the alpha in this duo. And beyond that, I feel like Zara is not really a focus in the story, and the points where we have seen her being a focus, she doesn't really come off in that great of a light. So really at this point, I'm not really feeling it for Zara, though to be fair, I wasn't really feeling it to begin with. So because of that, I have her here on number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have another Brawn to talk about, and here we have Kate. And I think Kate is someone who has been creeping up on my power ranking as of late. I feel like she's become more of a relevant figure on the show, though even then, I do question how much of it is positive, to where, well, she does talk about winning the rewards in each of the episodes where she does win a reward. But on top of that, you have her talking about creating this women's alliance during the merge episode and how taking out Jessie is a key part of that. But then we don't really see the women's alliance coming together, and if anything, by episode 15, she is targeting Logan and wanting to get her out of the game and being part of this plan to break up Laura and Logan. And I feel like her decisions there just kind of undermine that whole notion of creating the women's alliance. In general, I feel like Kate is someone who, while we have been seeing more of her lately, I still feel like she's not that relevant to the story, and I feel like where she does get content, she's kind of being undermined and kind of going against what she was saying before. So at this point, I'm not feeling it for Kate either. The reason she's higher is simply because she's been getting more content than Morgan, who is completely non-existent on the show. But beyond that, I feel like Kate is not winning, which is why she's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and this person has dropped off compared to last week, as I feel like I'm pretty much out on this person at this point. But at number 6, we do have Kalen. And Kalen is someone who I have been defending during a lot of the pre-merge. I saw him as a potential dark horse contender to win. However, at this point, I think I'm out on Kalen, if I'm being honest, as I feel like this was a very underwhelming week for him, as he gets essentially no content this week, despite this being the merge week, where this should have been this big turning point for a story, where he should have been talking about how this is the next chapter of the game. But despite this, he gets nothing to do, despite there being opportunities for him to get content, where, for one, you have him winning 2 immunities in a row. The fact that he doesn't get to highlight either of those immunity wins is a bad sign there. But then beyond that, you have his talk about getting the graduates back together and how Kalen is involved with a lot of these votes and working alongside AJ and Miles. And yet for Kalen to get no content there, while AJ and Miles are these major characters on the show, is a pretty bad sign for Kalen. And I feel like the fact that Kalen is just kind of dying off in the edit is probably a bad sign for his trajectory moving forward. And it actually wouldn't shock me at this point if he ends up being like a runner-up. I could definitely see that path for him, considering the content that he got during the pre-merge. But at this point, I feel like with how inconsistent his edit has been and how the potential that I saw in him earlier is just not panning out, I can't really justify having Kalen too much higher at this point. So because of that, I did drop him here to number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we actually have the highest ranked Brawn member on the board. By number 5, we do have Paulie. And again, Paulie is really only moving up because other people are out of the game, so naturally he would move up. And on top of that, he's at least a consistent presence on the show and being this underdog. Though even then, despite him being this underdog, I feel like we're not supposed to be rooting for him. And if anything, the show is kind of making a joke out of him. Where we see this week that we had that whole thing of the torch falling on his head on the way to tribal, and he's talking about it in the next episode, only for them to play dodo music as he's talking about how no one cares about him or asks if he's okay. And again, I feel like there's just moments like that throughout the week that just makes me think that the show is just kind of treating him like a donkey at this point, despite him being this clear underdog. And on top of that, he is still in a pretty bad position gameplay wise. He is still being called a snake oil salesman. He is a target at each of the votes here. And at this point, I feel like he's on a similar trajectory to Simon from Heroes vs. Villains, to where while he could scrape his way through a couple more rounds, I just don't see how he gets towards the end at this point. And I feel like the edit isn't really backing him up to actually go on to survive all this adversity. So while Paulie is his underdog, while he is a big character on the show, I feel like at this point he's pretty unlikely to actually win the season, which is why he's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and what do you know, it's all brains because that's the season for you. But number 4, we do have AJ. And again, this was an interesting week for AJ gameplay wise, where he is still a pretty big character on the show, and someone who at least is coming off as a big player and someone who's able to scrape on by despite him being talked about as this big target in the game. But at the end of the day, I still think he is someone who is pretty primed for a fall at some point. I feel like in a lot of ways, he is coming off as the next coming of King George, which is obviously not the greatest sign there, even though he could still make some big moves along the way. I also think there are some signs moving forward that he could win the battle against Logan. I feel like he could definitely blindside Logan, which I think is a positive there. But even if he does that, I still think he's someone who will come up short by the end of it. I feel like this week didn't really change my overall view of AJ, even though it was somewhat impressive that he was able to survive these rounds unscathed. But at the end of the day, I feel like I'm more confident in the other people to actually pull out the win, which is why he's here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we actually had the same person at number 3 as I did last week, and here we have Logan. And to be honest, I didn't really know what to do with Logan, if I'm being honest. As I just said, I think AJ will probably win the battle against Logan. I feel like there are definitely a lot of warning signs that Logan could be set up for this fall relatively soon. And even this week, even ignoring the AJ of it all, I still think there were some pretty worrying signs for Logan here as well, where she talks a lot about not getting her way and how she finally wants to take control, only for people to push back against that. I feel like she is being talked about as this emotional player due to her wanting to put her foot down and someone who's pretty stubborn. So I feel like this was definitely not a great week for Logan, and I'm probably lower on her chances of actually winning the game at this point. Though to be fair, I think I'm also kind of lower on AJ's chances as well. So really, I think it's just the top 2 who I think have a true shot of winning the game at this point. That kind of leaves Logan behind, but really the main reason Logan is as high is because I'm pretty much out on everyone else. I feel like everyone else has way bigger holes in their edit compared to Logan, even though I still think Logan is someone who I wouldn't expect to actually win by the end of it. It's just that I feel like the top 2 people are really the only 2 people who I think can win the game at this point, which is why Logan is here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and it's actually the same top 2 as last week. Though I did debate on the order a bit, I did debate whether this was a better week for one person than it was for the other. However, after some thought, I did decide to stick with my original order. By number 2, we do have Karin. And again, I feel like this was a fine week for Karin, where in a lot of ways she is still getting consistent content on the show. She is being shown being this main adversary to AJ. Though at the same time, she also talks a lot about how she wants to target AJ this week and how she wants to finally get back at him, only for her to not actually do so. Now, mind you, you can excuse this by the fact that she said right before Tribal that she doesn't want to piss off Zara and how taking out AJ now would turn Zara against her and cause her to lose her buddy. So I think that's at least something you can use to excuse this, though at the same time, it's not great that she is being shown talking so much about targeting AJ in this spot only to not actually do so. And I think on top of that, I think there is a little it factor that I think is lacking from Karin's edit right now that also makes it a bit tricky to have her here at number 1, even though I think the number 1 person also has some issues. But I think for now, I'm still more confident in the number 1 person, if I'm being honest, as even though I think Karin still has a lot of makings to go on to be the winner if the number 1 person has a downfall, I'm still a bit more confident in the number 1 person actually pull out the win by the end of it. So because of that, I do have to leave Karin here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Brains vs. Brawn 2 at this point is still Miles. Now, like I said, it was a debate between Miles and Karin, as I feel like there's definitely a debate for Miles to be lower here, as he's obviously someone who is now latching on to AJ and is being talked about in a somewhat negative light by the others. They talk about the need to break up AJ and Miles. You also have his big move in episode 14 where he does use his knowledge as power to steal Kristen's idol and then blindside PD there, which I think is a bit of a questionable move, as while he does pick up Paulie in the process, he also pisses off a good amount of the tribe, as we literally see the likes of Logan confronting him after the tribal there, and him just openly admitting that he doesn't want to work with Logan. So I feel like there's definitely a lot of question marks with the actual move there. The fact that he just unilaterally went against the entire tribe to blindside PD and also upset Kristen in the process, making sure that she doesn't work with him moving forward. All to pick up Paulie, who is still this consensus target moving forward. And even he's talking about how he doesn't want to keep Paulie for his end game. So I think there's definitely a lot of question marks with that actual move. Though at the same time, he still gets to explain his perspective a good amount. He obviously gets to talk a lot about reuniting the graduates and how that's a possibility. And the fact he's still part of the majority at the following round, where he's able to convince the likes of Karin and Zara to go along with breaking up Laura and Logan in the spot. Again, I think that's still pretty good gameplay, and he is able to reintegrate well enough from the actual move to blindside PD there. So I do think at the end of the day, I still feel somewhat okay about Miles. Now, I think the other thing to question is whether this is a journey edit or not. I think that's definitely a big question mark. And I think if this were Survivor US, I would probably knock Miles more for this, probably have him a bit lower. Though I think with this being Australian Survivor, I could definitely see Australian Survivor adopting this journey edit style a bit more than something like Survivor US, especially when Miles has been a consistent presence throughout the entire season. It's not as if he's just popping off out of nowhere after being invisible in week 1. So because of that, I'm still willing to give Miles the benefit of the doubt. I still think Miles is someone that we're meant to be rooting for, more so than Karin. And I think that was enough to give Miles the edge for me, which is why he's here number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm covering Survivor 48, as well as The Amazing Race 37, so be on the lookout for videos on those shows. I'm on Patreon and a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.